What's up, everybody? Today I will be talking about a book that definitely changed my life in a lot of ways, a lot of positive ways. It really challenged my perspective on life and how I view human existence and all those types of things. I had a great time reading through it. It was recommended to me by a professor who I'm close with. And then I was gifted the book by my friend Dan. Shout out to Dan. He even wrote a little inscription in here. By the way, if you're ever gifting somebody a book, you should consider writing an inscription. Gives a special energy to the book, I feel like. But regardless, before I hop into everything, of course, a disclaimer: this video is for entertainment and informational purposes only. Any opinions expressed are solely my own and should not be interpreted as professional, medical, legal, financial, or psychological advice. But with that out of the way, I'm going to jump into just the book. The book is Awareness by Anthony DeMello. DeMello was a psychotherapist and a Jesuit priest. Before you think like, oh, is this guy trying to recommend some book written by a Christian apologist? I'm not. This book, other than just using Jesus Christ as an example to illustrate things, it's not religious at all. And this is coming from someone from an agnostic position. I'm not Christian. I don't have any religious beliefs. Pretty much my whole entire life, I've never really been religious. DeMello ties in a lot of things from Eastern religions. There's talk about Hindu and Buddhist concepts. Yeah, so I'm not. This isn't a book summary necessarily, because this book is so dense and there's so much sauce in this book. Like, I'm just gonna show you. This isn't like some weird look at me I read. This is purely just to show you like how powerful this book was for me. I don't know how well you'll be able to see any of this, but there's a decent amount of stuff in here that's highlighted. Yeah, I remember when the first time I read this book, I was sitting and it was like almost it felt like every other page I was highlighting something. The reason I was highlighting a lot of it because a lot of the stuff was very thought provoking. The whole point of the book is detaching and sort of being aware and that this will lead to a sense of happiness and a continuing sense of happiness. The book challenged my concept of happiness. I guess I used to look at life like it's there's ebbs and flows, and of course there are, but that your mood also had to flow like that. And this book almost made me think about that a little differently, and it made me think that there's a reality where you can be happy all the time, which is hard to grasp because we have these emotions, but that's how powerful this book was for me. One thing he talks about, one idea, is how people don't want to be unconditionally happy. They say like, I'll be happy if, and that was a big thing for me. That opened my eyes to a lot of things. The whole idea is you can be happy right now. Like, and obviously there's going to be times in your life where you're going through hard times. The way I thought about it is separating struggling from suffering. Struggle, the way I guess I would define it for the sake of this video, struggle is, things like hardship, loss, and like traditionally bad things, right? You don't have to identify with the struggle. I think when we identify with the struggle, that's when the suffering comes in. And that's sort of what DeMello talks about. When we identify with our bad feelings, that's where the suffering comes from. So, for example, if you're feeling depressed, right? His argument is that you're suffering from that depression because you're attaching to the feeling. And the whole idea is you sort of sit back and say, I would say for myself, for example, like, let's say I'm feeling depressed. I can frame it as Zachary is feeling depressed, but I separate from that. So I can feel that feeling. I'm sort of viewing it. I'm viewing it from an outside perspective. I see that dark cloud, that depression cloud, but I'm not letting it get its claws into me. I'm just viewing it. I can acknowledge that it's there and feel it, but I'm not identifying with it. At least for me, it's almost like a cure for the suffering in a way. And of course, for me, like, this was a very new concept, and I know it's big in Eastern thought. Like, I'm not super educated on world religion, but I'm fairly certain, like, in Buddhism, there's similar, if not like identical, ideas being expressed. But it was very eye opening for me, and he even DeMello talks about this, like, because when I first started changing this my original view on feeling, I always viewed bad feelings as happening to me, right? Like, they're happening to me and I'm feeling bad because they're happening to me, and there's nothing I can really do except try to change my circumstances to get this bad feeling away. But DeMello's whole thing is to sort of let go. And with that, you have to let go of all your ideas that you've lived with, right? This isn't verbatim, but one of the best quotes, in my opinion, in the book is, you don't fear the unknown because you can't fear what you don't know. We fear the loss of the known. Because again, DeMello's argument is that we don't want to change. He gives some commentary on therapy, and in his view, it's a lot of the time people go to therapy for relief. They go to therapy to get relief, but not the cure, because the cure is painful. Which again is that's some powerful stuff, man. That's the whole idea. Like, the cure is painful because there's that fear there, and the fear is stemming from the loss of the known. And definitely just in general, when, at least for me, I've gone 21 years with my ideas change, obviously, but certain outlook on life, right? But when you start challenging that and really being like truly open-minded, like receptive to anything, it can be scary because you start reconsidering things you thought, and reconsidering things you thought to be true that maybe they're not, maybe there is nuance to everything, and maybe it isn't so like one way or the other type of thing. So one of my favorite parts of the book, by the way, this book is based on a lecture. I'll put the link in the description. It's a long lecture. It's like 8.5 hours, but it's great. Like, in my opinion, me and my friend Dan have listened to it, not all the way through a ton of times, but we popped into it a bunch of times and listened to it. We both read the book. This is describing what happens in the lecture, but I'm just going to read it quickly. So, quote, "A woman once told me that when she was a child, her Jesuit cousin gave a retreat in the Jesuit church in Milwaukee. He opened each conference with the words, 'The test of love is sacrifice, and the gauge of love is unselfishness.' That's marvelous. I asked her, 'Would you want me to love you at the cost of my happiness?' 'Yes,' she answered. 'Isn't that delightful? Wouldn't that be wonderful? She would love me at the cost of her happiness, and I would love her at the cost of my happiness. And so you've got two unhappy people, but long live love." End quote. And that I thought was brilliant. Like, and then that's a I still struggle with grasping that concept because, and again, I don't know how much I buy into this philosophy, right? Like, I'm still learning. I'm still trying to just read more and get as much information as I can from all different sources. But I thought that was incredible. That whole section, like, it's almost like I don't really know. I don't know if I could put it much better than that section, but I'm sure you can plug it into some LLM and ask it to sort of describe what he's saying, because I'm not going to do it justice. But I guess where I'll leave this off for now, the book is titled Awareness, right? DeMello argues throughout the book, be aware, be absolutely unequivocally aware of everything that's going on inside your mind. And he says, with that awareness, with that objective self observation, you are able to detach from essentially everything. And that is what allows the happiness, the ongoing happiness. And this ties back into the argument again. I don't want to say for certain, but I'm almost fairly certain this is repeated in at least like Buddhist teachings. Desire inherently leads to suffering, because at least in my interpretation, desire leads to suffering because you're attaching to that desire. I want to make sure I'm wording things correctly. But the whole idea is, desire inherently will cause suffering because you're attaching to that desire. And I speculate that in some people's minds, it's almost like if they have this desire, if that desire isn't fulfilled, they can't be happy. But DeMello's argument is you can be happy right now. And that brings me to, again, I already said, I think I was talking about another quote that I said was the best quote in the book. But this one, if I did say that, this is another great one. This is arguably my favorite. So this section is called On Wanting Happiness. He says, "What's the earthly use of putting a man on the moon when we cannot live on the earth?" And I thought that again was just brilliant. He talks about like we're always thinking to the future and like this and that, and making like you can be happy right now. And that's a beautiful thing. This book is definitely against the grain. I can't say for sure, but at least for me, I read through it, and there's still parts that I have difficulty grasping, and there are some things I disagree with, but also I'm staying open minded and trying to grasp these things. If you want to hear me talk more about this book, let me know in the comments. But there's copies all over the internet. There's the lecture that I'll be pasting down below, and yeah, I've never had so much fun reading a book before. I was just having a blast. I was like sitting there, and every other page has me smiling, and I'm laughing. He's pretty funny. I will say the one part of his prose I'm not a huge fan of. It's like a little like definitely like directive in some points where I wish he was slightly more passive, but I'm sort of splitting hairs here. I'm not going to sort of say everyone should read this and that this book will change your life, but it definitely had a big impact on mine. And if you're looking to read a cool book, I think you could give it a shot. It's not very long. It's a pretty easy read. Yeah, I think it's under 200 pages. It's really not too bad. I hope I did an okay way of sort of getting into the book, of sort of explaining the book a little bit, and explaining some of the concepts. I barely scratched the surface with with what DeMello writes about. There's just so much cool stuff in that book. If anyone, again, has any ideas for videos, you can let me know in the comment section. And thank you to those who commented on my last video with ideas. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed. I hope I did an okay job of explaining my thoughts on this book and some of DeMello's thoughts. And yeah, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay curious.